My name is Norm Volsky, your host, and this is the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast.
Thanks, Norm. It's an honor to be here, and it's been fun to work with you over the years.
Hello, and welcome to the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast with your host, Norm Volsky. And today we are thrilled to have Dan Nardi, CEO of Reimagine Care. Dan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Norm. It's a pleasure to be here finally.
I love it. Very good. Well, thank God it's not a real boxing match because you keep yourself in impeccable shape, Dan. So glad that this is just a battle of wits. But anyways, for all of our viewers and listeners that don't know Dan and his background, Dan is CEO of Reimagine Care. Reimagine Care is transforming the cancer treatment experience by delivering high quality on-demand care beyond the traditional clinic-based model. Previously, Dan was the COO of Carrum Health. And prior to that, he was the original VP of Ops and employee number 13 at Livongo. Dan brings incredible operational and team building experience and is a proven leader in the healthcare industry, especially in scaling rapidly growing businesses from early stage through explosive growth. In addition to this, Dan is a board member of several nonprofits and an advisor for multiple startups in the digital health space. Dan's one of the best leaders and culture builders that I know, and we're thrilled to have you on.
Thanks again. Try not to make me blush here.
Yeah, I'll try not to. So, you've got an extremely accomplished career for someone, only a couple decades into your career. So I have to ask, you've spent most, if not your entire career in healthcare. How did you decide that healthcare was where you wanted to be?
Yeah, it's kind of funny, Norm. Actually, I lucked into it. I had been at a company while I was finishing up my master's degree in computer science, and it was a small company, Channel Health. It was a subsidiary of IDX. It got bought while I was there by Allscripts. I had no idea what EHRs were at the time, and I found out I was learning more when I was showing up and working with them than I was in any class. And I decided
Even at the prestigious university that is Vermont?
Yes, yeah.
Like Catamounts. I know they provide a great education, but it sounds like IDX provided a pretty good one too.
It was great. I mean, in both of them for very different reasons, but I realized that that there was a lot of opportunity to make an impact in the healthcare space. So after graduating, I signed up full time, and then we had a fun run building EHRs.
Love it. So you joined Livongo as employee number 13, pre-Series A, eventually had a team of over 100 people reporting to you, but in the early years, it was very lean. Sure, you were wearing a lot of hats. You guys got through a record-breaking IPO. What convinced you to join Livongo, and tell me about all the learning experiences you had in your 5.5 or so years there?
All of the learning experiences. I don't know if we have enough time, but we'll try and hit a couple. After going through the growth at Allscripts and spent a short stint of time at Valence, that I really had a passion and got energized working at smaller stage companies and really kind of taking a great idea and building it and seeing it kind of come to fruition and setting it up for scale. And so Glenn and Joe called and we're talking about this crazy idea of chronic conditions and helping people with diabetes. And so at first I wasn't quite sure, but then I realized that, might as well take the leap. And obviously I trusted, Glenn and Joe and the team that they were building. So it was kind of de-risked the whole opportunity for me and figured it was a great opportunity to go just learn and build a business. And we had a great run. It was a lot of fun. I got to work with some very talented people and really enjoyed that opportunity to build a business, make an impact for patients, but also, we built a great culture. And I think that was one of the things that really set us apart and allowed us to be even more successful was the great people. And we had a great mission and we worked together towards it. I really learned to appreciate the culture, the team building aspect of scaling businesses.
Yeah, I think what Livongo had that was really special is, a unique and very agreed upon North Star. And everyone was rowing in the same direction and everyone was working incredibly hard to get to the destination. And I've not seen many companies since that have that same clear direction, clear, goal as a company. And I think that was certainly one of the many calling cards of the organization. So tell me a little bit about, what Joe Carey taught you and what Glenn Tolman taught you and others on the leadership team taught you and certain experiences that make you the leader you are today?
Yeah, it's there was a lot of things, and I think that was at startups, especially if you join at earlier stages of your career. I think just say yes a lot, ask a lot of questions, and observe. I think is a great way to learn, and you see how people how they operate, how they make decisions, the values that they have, and I think that was just kind of an MBA on steroids. A lot of people are, oh, should I go get an MBA? And I said, well, you can do that, or you can work for a couple growth stage companies, and you may end up getting the same outcome. But I think a couple of the big things that I've taken away from that time is, the importance of team, the importance of culture, hiring the right people. And it's a really important equation. It's the right people for the right role at the right time. And that evolves as companies grow and scale. And so I've been able to go on and work for a couple of different startups since, and being able to take that and just like, hey, there are people that are really great fits when the company's early, when it's like 20, 25, 30 employees, and they're rock stars. But as a company gets, bigger and scales, and, swim lanes start to narrow and start to wear less hats, they may not be the right fit anymore. And that's okay. And I think just being upfront with the team right from the beginning, and just saying that, and really like having kind of a collective agreement of what that means, it really helps kind of take away the unknown of what that might be as company scale. So that's a big one.
I just want to interject very quickly. And to your opposite point, like you can meet someone you think is fantastic, but early in the growth, you sometimes know that like, hey, I want to meet this person, or I want to rehash things with this person 2-3 years from now, because I don't think now is the right time for them to join. I don't think I'd be putting them in a position of success. A good friend of the podcast, and someone, I don't know if you know him personally, but you definitely played in the same sandboxes. It used to drive me crazy when we'd find someone who's fantastic, and Dan Perez would be like, well, they're great, but like they're not right for our company at this stage. Let's keep them in mind for the future. At the time, I thought he was just politely telling me, no, I'm not interested, but didn't want to hurt our feelings. But he was being truly genuine in that, like, hey, like they're great. I would not be setting them up to succeed at Hinge as like a Series A company, but when we get to Series C, like that person's perfect for what our organization is trying to accomplish. So, I've seen a handful of companies, Livongo included, obviously, that did a really good job of knowing who the right fits are and when the right time to add them to the mix was. And it can, be crucial for sure. Sorry to interrupt, but just wanted to share that.
No, and I think that's exactly right. I know Dan, and I completely agree with that approach. And I would say, taking it one step further, it's not just when to add them in, but also when to part ways with the people that are there, as either they outgrow the company or the company outgrows them. And that, again, kind of demystify that, right, for people right from the beginning. I think it's important because, it will definitely happen. You're either going to outgrow the company, if you're in a rapidly growing company, like a just like 2% growth type company, you will either outgrow the company or it will outgrow you, and that's okay. So you either have to find a new seat on the bus, for that person at that time, or help them find a new bus. And that's just like the most helpful thing you can do for people, because when you do have that combination, right people, right role, right time, it just magnifies the impact that they can have in the business. And that's huge. So I fully agree with that. And maybe going back to your original question, one other kind of big lesson. I mean, there's so many, but you have to have, especially at early stage companies, you have to have just a urgency about yourself, right? And the work you're doing and where you're focusing your time and energy. And you have to have a get shit done type of mentality, right? You can't just be like waiting for other people. You can't be just waiting for things to happen, waiting for the next milestone. Like, you have to be going out there and making it happen. And if you're working with people that you're all doing that, that's what just also magnifies. And I think that's a big part of what our success was early. And the company since then, Carrum was the same thing. One of our values was built around getting shit done. And, here at Reimagine Care, we just went through a great exercise to kind of refresh our values. And there's urgency as one of ours. And so it falls in that same category. So I think all companies going through this growth stage have to have that as one of their core values. It's just so important for everyone to kind of align behind that.
Yep. There were a ton of successes at Livongo. There was, financial successes, there were clinical successes, there were personal successes. What are you most proud of from your time at Livongo? Like, what are the accomplishments that you and the teams that you led accomplished that kind of helped Livongo, get to where it ultimately, um, you know,
Yeah.
peaked at?
I think it comes back to the people, and I'm gonna put the people into two categories. I think if I look back on that time, I am really, really proud of the impact we had for our patients, for the users of our platform. Like there were quotes. We used to get these patient quotes, and we had a channel that people kind of share, like, oh, hey, here was the impact this had. Here was a patient story. Here was this, like, just really reminded us why we were there. And that was just so important to understand and helped everyone kind of get refreshed and re-energized to keep doing it. But I think the other kind of people bucket is the relationships that we built. And I think that was really really important. I kind of made the joke about MBAs earlier, right? A big part of getting MBAs, yes, you learn, but also a big network. I
Mhm.
actually think going through that time with Livongo, we built some really close bonds, and there's a lot of great relationships, friendships that came out of that will continue on as all of our careers have gone in different paths
Mhm.
and start to kind of come back and overlap. And I think that's great. So I'd say people, for those two reasons, are probably my two biggest proud moments from building Livongo.
I love it. And like what I notice about people who have been through, the Livongo success hockey stick like growth is there's a lot of mutual respect
Mm.
between the people that were there because it was really fun, it was really successful, but it wasn't easy. Like everyone worked really hard to accomplish what they accomplished. So, again, I'm going to make a couple analogies. Glenn and a couple others might want to kill me. But, I think people rushing and pledging a fraternity or sorority kind of build a bond because, like, sometimes that process isn't necessarily the easiest. And
Yep.
then obviously, you talk about athletic teams
Mhm.
that, you know, they maybe not have seen each other for decades, but they have one of those like reunions where the team welcomes the team back and the fans all cheer for them before the game or at halftime. And you can see they still have those relationships and they still have that camaraderie. Not that they still talk daily all to this day, but when they all get together, they remember like all those challenges they overcame. And with that comes that mutual respect and bond and appreciation, for what everyone brought to the table. So I
Absolutely.
see a little bit of overlap between athletics and Greek life and
Yeah.
career progression and all that type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would agree with that 100%. It's not like I talk with a lot of those people, my former peers or team members or, other people on a daily basis, but it is always great to reconnect with
Mhm.
them. And
Love that.
it's always fun.
I'm embarrassed to say this. I've been recruiting for 13 or 14 years. I don't think until the last 5 years I could actually explain like what an operations executive did on a day-to-day basis. I would consider you one of the best operations talents, I've ever met. Can you explain to the audience like what does a VP of ops or COO do on a daily basis and how is that impactful on businesses?
Yeah, you're not the only one. So I'll say that. Operations, it'll mean different things at different companies. And to some extent, it means different things to different people, even within a company. So I
Yeah.
think it ends up in some cases being a catch-all. But if I take a step back and I say, like, having a successful operator in a business is so important at those early stages because you've got the visionaries, you've got like the Glens of the world, Satch, a Carrum, others, like you've got these great visionaries and they know where they want to go and they know what they want to build. But the operator is the one that's going to help them actually get there, right? How like set up the right infrastructure, the foundation that this whole thing can scale on. And so, like I said, that ends up being different things and also at different stages of growth. Joe and I kind of split up a lot of things in, early days at Livongo. He would take a handful of, teams, departments, projects. I do the other ones. We kind of like overlap, swapped. We ended up like it just, you end up being what the business needs at that stage. And I think that is the hallmark of a really great operator is someone that can flex and flow and move and every day you show up and it could be something different or a different fire drill or whatever it might be. But I think that's the sign, especially early days, of someone that can just be that flexible. Yeah, maybe not the all-star fielder, but a really good kind of jack of all trades that can move around and play a lot of different positions depending on the needs. So I think that's, if I were to boil it down, and I'm probably oversimplifying it, but that's probably how I would describe it.
You tell me if I'm oversimplifying it myself. Engineering builds it, sales sells it, and operations make sure it works.
That works. Yeah, I
All
think
right.
that's a big part of it. But there's so many other things. Like again, depending on the company, operations could include HR or not. It could include recruiting or not. It could include finance or not. Like again, depending on the stage, you can add all those things.
It can include customer success or not. Sometimes it's only the member side. Sometimes it's member and customer. Like there's so many like stakeholders.
Exactly. And I think part of it is being a good complement to those other departments and teams and really understanding the interaction between them. Like you end up being kind of the glue between all.
Yeah, and then obviously, like in healthcare, like compliance is so important, and making sure that you're doing things both logically and also like by the letter of the law. So I
Yep.
think that is like a very overlooked component from people in other markets that like aren't necessarily in something as heavily regulated as healthcare, where all of that responsibility is on operations in most cases.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
All right. So, you mentioned like, hey, at certain points of someone's career, either the job outgrows them or they outgrow the job. I think after 5.5 years, you were ready to run like a full operations department at a very successful digital health company. That's when we met. I won't say this just to make you blush, but it's true. When I met you and I presented you to my industry contacts, I have yet to get a better response rate since that email. I think 60% of executives responded saying, hey, I would like to talk to Dan. That's a very unique experience. No offense to anyone else I've ever, brought to market, but you didn't get to 60% or better. I promise you that. So the reason I mentioned this is you had your pick of the litter. You had a ton of options and you chose Carrum. Why? And, what was special about that business?
Well, I am flattered and I appreciate that.
Not blowing smoke. You can watch every one of my 50 plus episodes. I've not said that to a single other guest.
Well, I appreciate. I've listened to most of them too, so
Yeah.
I can vouch for that. So why Karam? As I was exploring, I mean, coming off that really great run that we had with Livongo, I mean, just being able to kind of take some time away and take a pause and really understand, to be thoughtful about what was next, was really, it was great for me to kind of just get my head in the right spot, but then also to kind of think about like what was next. So I was evaluating the opportunity, I was evaluating the company, I was evaluating the space, right? The competition, the people within the company, the board, the investors. I was going through like a lot of this to really understand this equation of like what was going to be the best situated, not only from a company perspective, but for me and an opportunity perspective. I mean, some people
Mhm.
joke that startups are kind of like gambling, right? You just like you're taking a swing and seeing what happens. And I felt like you can de-risk a lot of that by really understanding a lot of the variables that go into it. And as I got to meet with Satch and understand the market and Brent and the other team, like it's like I felt really strongly that it was positioned for some great opportunity. And it's still, I mean, it still continues to grow. And I'm really, really excited. I've been, continue to root and support the team. I mean, I just think that they're off to the races in a great way. And so, I'm glad that that kind of played out the way that it did. So.
I'm glad. Yeah, no, I'm thrilled. I don't know if I'm sharing any news here, but Karum's had record breaking year after record breaking year for 3 or 4 years in a row now. And they're just, killing their revenue projections, which is fantastic. So the company's thriving. And what I love about that business is it took a long time to educate the market and build all of the infrastructure. And they like built it ready to scale. And then you joined at that perfect inflection point when they started to really increase the amount of covered lives and employer clients and service lines. Like they moved into cancer during your time as COO. So like there's so much like different things that happened during your tenure, and it just timed up really nicely. So kind of walk through your experience there, lessons learned, successes, struggles.
Yeah, it's so same thing. It's funny. I kind of joined around the same time as when I did with Livongo, like early days. We hadn't had a full A round yet, but had a great idea. So, like you said, it was just super well positioned, and it was a great team. And this was before the pandemic, and so we were, back. I was actually one of the few people that wasn't living in the San Francisco area, so I'd fly in most weeks and spend time and really like built those relationships early, which I think was huge as we were then transitioned into the COVID world of like going fully remote almost overnight, we had those relationships and the bonds that we had built from that time of being in the office together. And that's what kind of held us together. But I'd say, a similar kind of thing, like lessons learned, the company that is about to go on a big growth trajectory like that, you need to have some of the foundational items. You need to have like really, strong values that are specific to the company, right? You don't want just like 5, 6, 8 values that could be on any company's website. You want to have like a small number of OKRs or goals, depending on whatever framework you use, like 3 to 4 goals. Like keep it super simple and memorable and impactful, both of those fronts. And we did that. We set up that right foundation that allowed us to just like, all right, everyone knows, here's what we're driving towards. Here's how we behave, how we act, how we treat each other. Bang, let's go do it. And so I think that was just a kind of one of the early inflection points was like, all right, we got all this. Now the rest of it's going to be easier. And so then, yeah, it was just more of the same. Let's go land and expand. Let's go find these deals. Let's expand. Let's make them successful. And so I think that timing the market for Carrum was huge because the Centers of Excellence platform, there were a couple players in there, but like, again, that was part of what I was doing my research on before was like, what's the opportunity here? And it was kind of new. And now it's people understand it now, especially all the benefits leaders, like they understand what these are. This becomes commonplace. But back then it wasn't. And so we were kind of like making that market and building the right connections and setting it up with the benefits consultants and educating a market on what we were. And it was fun. It was fun to see that, like, just all of a sudden, just kind of dominoes start falling. And obviously, there's still work to be done, and the business to continue to grow over there. But it's well positioned.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And I do get a little chuckle in the standpoint that, yes, when we started working together with Carrum, it wasn't a big name in the space. Like a lot of people were like, who? What? What exactly do they do? Now there's a company we both have some involvement with that now describes themselves, if you oversimplify it, who were on the podcast a few weeks ago, is like, hey, you see what like Carrum's doing in surgery and cancer? We're doing it in radiology. And that's One Imaging, and that was Elon and Melinda who were here a few weeks ago. So, Carrum has gone from what do they do to now other companies are kind of like, hey, like, see all the success Carrum's doing and having and what they do. Well, we're applying that same idea to a different, service line or market. And then people are like, oh, now the light bulb goes off. I get it. Like, talk to me more. Tell me how there's, advantages, disadvantages, all that kind of thing. So really, really cool. Tell me this. Livongo was a remote care company. Like the whole idea was, hey, like we want people staying healthy at home, at work, on the go, traveling. Carrum was a very different model. That's not a remote care company. That is, concierge medicine, maybe even having patients travel to centers of excellence to get the very best care at a, cost-effective price. How different was it to be leading operations at a remote care company compared to more of a services company in Carrum?
There's definitely differences. I mean, and to even further kind of expand on that, like Livongo, we had a medical device, so we had supply chain, which I'd never run supply chain before, but that was part of it. Early days, and I had responsibility for that. Carrum's not, right? There isn't. So like there are definitely differences. But I would say again, it comes back to the foundation of any growth stage company in the digital health space. You have to have some of these like just basics, the blocking and tackling, and the rest of it, like the nuance that each of these businesses have, services versus, technology, supply chain or not, like all these things, you can solve for all of that. That's like hiring really great people that know those areas and empowering them to be super successful and build it. But I think, especially in an ops perspective, it's, or a leader in the business of any of these businesses, it's like understanding the basic blocking and tackling that you need to do to set up a company for rapid growth. And if you don't do that, then I don't care how talented or how great of an idea it is, it won't succeed. And I think that's sometimes something that might be missed for some companies. Have great ideas. They're not succeeding because it's not a great idea. A lot of times they either run out of money or they just can't time the market right, whatever it is. And a lot of that comes back to the fact that like you got to have the basic foundation built before you start throwing up multiple floors on top of it.
Yeah. And you need to know when to, hold your chips and when to push them all, in the middle of the table, and that's where timing can come
Yep.
through really well. Like I think Sach and Brent were extremely patient for a very long time. And they knew like, hey, we know this market's going to be big. It's just not happening as fast as we want, but they didn't force it. They didn't hire too much before they were ready. Like they were just very patient. And then when the timing was right, the whole leadership team at that point you were there was like, okay, here's our time in the sun. Let's go grow and let's take a real run at this thing. So it's really interesting to see like how timing is just so crucial, not only when entering the market, but also knowing when to really double down. So at Carrum, that was your first time running like a full department, COO, like everything operations flowed through you. So you really built that department. You inherited a couple people, but like you made a ton of hires, a
Yep.
lot of them great hires. And I had a front row seat to several of them. What's your hiring philosophy? How do you think about building culture, building a diverse team, and bringing in people that are going to help you, scale and grow and make sure that the company does well, regardless of who's in charge?
Yeah, I think you underplayed your role. You had a very key part in building out a lot of our
Thank you. It
a lot of
was
our
a
team.
lot of fun.
Yes, and a bunch of really great
Not
people.
without its challenges, Dan, but fun
Wait,
nonetheless.
recruiting's not easy? I don't get it.
I will say the pandemic for me in one way was nice in the standpoint that Sach and Brent couldn't say everyone needed to live in San Francisco anymore. That was nice. That was definitely a restriction that allowed us to scale much quicker. But go on.
that helped you and I both out. So
Yeah.
I was on the same page. So thinking about people again, I'll go back a little bit to the equation we talked about earlier: right role, right person, right time. So I think from a recruiting perspective, really you got to spend the time up front as a hiring manager to define what you need, and not define what you need today, but define what you're going to need for this next leg of the journey you're on. So you have to really put some thought into it. And then once you define that, then you can start working with talented people such as yourself and your team to go out there and find some of these people or through your network. But it also understanding like it doesn't just have to be one profile, because if you define what you need and not define exactly who you want, then you're going to be better set up, because you might have someone where maybe you think, oh, an MBA candidate might be great, but actually maybe it's not. Maybe someone that's actually worked at a startup could be great, or maybe someone that's come from a larger company who was in a smaller department. So don't like get so caught up on the pedigree or the resume even. Don't define that. Define what you need, and then go find the people that can do that, that can deliver on that. And again, thinking about the stage ahead, I think is super important. Again, don't define, if you're a 20-person company, you're hiring a 21st employee, don't define it just for employee 21, and define it for like what it's going to be when you get to 50 or 100. And I think that's also super important. And then as you evaluate, all the people, like this is where values come in, right? Being able to like have questions in your interview panel that go back to your values and help understand, do people like live and breathe the same type of values you have? You don't want like homogeneous kind of candidates, right? So it's not just like asking or checking to find out if someone thinks about it the same way as me. In fact, I try and find people that think about things differently. You want to have like different views, different perspectives, different experiences that are all going to come together. And that's where the diversity kind of aspect of this, and I don't just mean in a DEI perspective, that's obviously very important, but like even just diversity of thought, diversity of, I said, experience, like that is so important as you're building a team, so you don't just get caught up in like the same old, or we're just going to do it one way because that's the only way we've ever done it before. And so those are some of the ways I kind of think about, like, you got to define the role really well, and then you got to make sure that your questions and your evaluation are tied back around your values. Otherwise, you could bring in someone and they're just not a fit, and you're just going to be replacing them in 6 months. So.
Well, I want to give you a shout out. If there's ever a Harvard Business Review on how to partner with an external search consultant and get the very best effort and value out of them, like we can study our relationship. No joke. I'm being dead serious. And the reason I say that is the reason I really enjoyed working with you from the very beginning is you understood that a organization needs to take recruiting seriously and prioritize it if you're going to be successful. Like it's very easy to say, oh yeah, we value recruiting and that's an important thing and that's priority here. But what happens when one of your customers called and asks, like, hey, can I have that slot? Oh, I have an interview. Oh, I'll just push it off to 2 weeks. Yeah, customer comes first. Or like, there's all these things that happen that in theory are like, yeah, recruiting's important. But when push comes to shove, whether it be customer requests or internal decisions or other priorities just start to cloud like someone's calendar. And
Yeah.
a lot of times, a company that doesn't really have a ton of experience in recruiting top talent will say, well, I can just push that interview. I can reschedule. I can cancel. What I really appreciated, my team appreciated about like you and Carrum as a whole is you guys rolled out the red carpet. You respected these people, you respected their time, you treated them well and with respect. Were you difficult in interviews and asked them tough questions and were firm? Sure. But
Yeah.
like there was respect and they felt valued and they felt like, hey, they're making time out of their day and they're not looking at their cell phone. They're not checking email. They're not tuning me out. All of those things are things a lot of my past clients have done.
Yeah.
Never you guys. And I think that starts at the top, with you. And I think you did a great job of encouraging the rest of the leadership team to do it. So I think, again, for me talking to anyone who is a hiring authority in a company, it's easy to say, yeah, recruiting is a really top priority and we want the best people. But it's one of those things where it's practice what you preach. All
Yeah.
of us can say like health and wellness and exercise and eating right is like something that's really important to us. But if you haven't worked out in 2 weeks and your last 3 meals have been fast food, is it what you say or is it what you do? And you guys were always about like, hey, we say it and we do it.
Yeah. Well, it's obviously very important. And I would also say, it's funny, companies that do that really well are probably the same ones that, for the ongoing employment of each of those people you hire, probably have that continued type of approach where like I do my best to not just push off one-on-ones. I mean, it happens sometimes, right? There are obviously some things that come up, travel or otherwise, but always trying to really hold that as like crucial time and not keep pushing those out because that sends the wrong message to the team as well. And so I think it starts at the beginning in the recruitment, and then you have to be able to continue to walk the walk with like how you continue to treat those team members as you move forward in that relationship. So I think it's like both of those tied together, but 100% agree. I think it's absolutely crucial to set the right tone.
I think it was Richard Branson that said, teach your employees like they're your top customers, and then your customers will then get great service. Like it's the same idea where it's like, hey, if you treat your employees great, then a lot of the issues you're trying to solve would probably go away.
Yep. Agreed.
So, it's really, really nice. So, again, this all stems to culture. Like,
Yep.
obviously, in the recruiting process, it's like, hey, like, you should join us. Here's why, and here's what we've built. But then when they show up, then it's like, okay, we weren't just selling you a bill of goods. This is actually how we operate on a day-to-day basis. I think you've built some of the best cultures I've seen. And I think people who have worked for you are extremely loyal and appreciative of like what you've done and how much you care about them. Talk to me about how you build those cultures and like what are some of your guiding principles there?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that comment. It takes work. I think first thing is just acknowledge it's going to take work. But as leaders of a business, like that's our job, right? There's obviously a big part of our job that is strategy and big decisions and product launches and all these other things that kind of go into it for sure. I mean that's obvious. But I think as leaders in the business, you have to make the time, keep those one-on-ones, don't keep pushing them off, have respect for the team members. Like we spend so much time and in some cases money recruiting team members that when they're on board, it's very easy. People just kind of like then stop spending that time, stop investing. And I think that's the worst possible scenario. You have to make sure we're spending the time. And then sometimes that means providing difficult feedback, right? It's, you have to be able to set a culture of feedback, not only to your direct reports, but also to your managers, your directors, peers, anywhere. Like you're really making sure, going back to your point, and we talked about this at Livongo. I think we spent a lot of really focused effort on it at Carrum, and something I've continued to carry forward now in Reimagine Care is like, we always want to have a culture of feedback where people feel super comfortable providing feedback, constructive and positive, and also receiving it, with positive intent. And I think if you build that right environment, then it allows you to really, like, you've got the respect there. Everyone's in it for the right reasons. And it allows people to just not dance around sensitive topics, not avoid things. Like, you can get right to it and be like, hey, here's the feedback from that meeting. Here's how we can be better. Bang, bang, bang. Okay, great. And then we're just keep moving forward, as opposed to like little things that build up over time and then blow up, or someone's not happy or leaves or whatever it might be. So I think that's one of the cores. I mean, there's so many. Like, culture is it's all the little things that, happen between the meetings, between the Slack messages, between the client visits. Like, that's where you have to focus the time or make the time, to be honest. And it's very easy not to, especially in growth stage companies. It's very, very easy to get tactical. And early in my career, I was like, all right, heads down, individual contributor. I'm going to crank shit out. I was really good at that. I loved it. But as you grow into leadership, you have to be able to, like, take your head up and spend time working on the business. That's something that Joe and I talked a lot about. And that was one of my biggest lessons I'll always take away from our relationship, was like, he was always great at being able to know when to work in the business and get in the weeds and the details, and when to work on the business. And I think that is, whether it be an operator or any leader in the business, I think that's those words to live by as you're progressing in your career.
Yeah. And I think like Carrum was an amazing progression for you, because you did a lot of things maybe for the first time. Like, for the first time, you owned like the full P&L of the operations department. You were involved in fundraising for the first time. I don't think you were going to investor pitches in your Livongo days. Like, that was part of your responsibilities at Carrum, like flying patients all over the country to get very, very complex surgeries. Like, that was a different type of thing for you. What are some of the things you learned from Carrum that just added to your toolbox, because you already had a pretty full set, even coming from Livongo and Allscripts?
Yeah, I think the importance of being able to make decisions and move quickly, right? I think as you work your way, further and further in your career, higher up in an organization, people are going to look to you to make decisions. And so it's important to be able to obviously empower all of your teams to make decisions, and the appropriate ones at appropriate levels. But when it is your turn to make decisions, take as much information as you can, be comfortable, especially in startups. Everyone loves to say 80-20 rule. Sometimes 50-50, flip a coin. Just got to make a decision and move and have conviction behind it, and learn, right? Have that learning mentality of like, okay, even if it's a wrong decision, at least we made a decision, moved quickly, learned something. Now we know the right way to do it. Let's go do it. And so I think you have to model that behavior as a senior leader, C-level or otherwise, like in an organization. You have to be able to model that behavior, because it's very easy. People the default is to not make decisions. Like, that's just, people don't want to make decisions. So you have to like set the right tone, and then going back to what I said, empower your team members making decisions. I don't want to make decisions. I want to empower people to make as many decisions as they can and should. But then also kind of the unwritten part of that. It's very easy. People talk about empowerment all the time, but you have to have a safe spot. You have to have a safe landing for people when they do make a decision and it doesn't work out. You can't fire them. You can't yell at them. You can't, try and make an example of them. What we do is we say, okay, let's learn from it. Okay? We made a mistake. That's all right. What do we learn from it? Okay. How do we course correct? Okay. Let's not make the same mistake again. Okay. Like, just, you have to be able to do that. And if you can model that behavior, then others will see that and they'll do the same thing. So I think that's, probably one of the things that as you work further and further up, you end up with more of a, spotlight on you. People, it's funny, as soon as you get a C-level title of any sort, like, all of a sudden, it's harder
You're
to get.
supposed to be perfect.
You're supposed to be perfect. And I think it's okay not to be. Just be fair with people, be transparent with people, and just be like, you know what, I'm not going to be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes, and I want you all to call me on it when I do. Yeah. That's important. And having a culture where people feel comfortable doing that, that's, when you've gotten to a good spot.
Well, you have this naturally, but, I think humility is huge in, being a C-level executive, like showing vulnerability, like showing you're human, meaning it's okay for everyone else on your team to be human, is so crucial. And I think like your ability to just have that naturally and, really allow people to be themselves and not play scared is like a very, very key thing that maybe you take for granted, because, it's just a natural thing for you. I see a pattern here You were at Livongo, you kind of outgrew that job. You're at Carrum, COO, you outgrew that job. No offense, but Carrum's still doing real well. So like you obviously did it well enough where you could leave and they still did well. Good news for Reimagine Care. I don't think there's a position above CEO. So like there's no flight risk here. But walk me through what caused you to join Reimagine Care. Like why was that the one you left a really special situation for? And tell me about like what this first year has been within the business.
Yeah, it was not something I've been looking for, right? Usually COOs, from my experience, don't always make the best CEOs. And so I had never had it on my radar. But then thankfully there was a couple of people, former peers and colleagues of mine that I really trust and appreciate that gave me some advice. I think you're ready for it. And I said, oh yeah, okay, whatever. I appreciate you, but no. And I wasn't looking for anything. Again, we were building something great and, was really invested in what we were doing, and then had a conversation, started to like learn about what Reimagine Care was. And the more and more I learned, the more potential I saw. We talked a little bit earlier about like having that right formula, understanding like how do you de-risk any kind of startup. It's amazing how well positioned Reimagine Care is in this space. And so, as I thought about it, there was a couple of really important factors. Yes, it's positioned extremely well, really talented group of people solving a problem, got a little bit of blue sky because it's not something that's already been done before. But then also, just it's in a sector of healthcare that is so important, right? We are all touched by cancer to some level at some point in our lives. And, more and more diagnoses happen, especially at younger ages. It's only going to magnify. And so as I thought about, what would be something that I ever would leave Carrum for, making a difference in cancer was one of the very, very few. And so as I learned a little bit more about it and felt like what they were looking for in a CEO was what I had and my experience and how I think about leadership and how I think about scaling businesses. And it just kind of all clicked. And so I figured, all right, this was going to be the best possible scenario I would ever have for stepping into this role. I'm not a Glenn Tolman. I was very clear from that. Like I'm not that big visionary.
Not many are. That's okay.
And again, I was up front with them and we talked about exactly the strengths I have and also the drawbacks of, I know my areas of opportunity as well, but it all kind of fell into place. And so that just gave me a ton of confidence and it's been amazing. So I've been on board now over a year, so a year and a couple months, and really, really well positioned. I feel like it takes a while to kind of step into a new company, especially at this level, and really understand all the moving parts. But I felt like 6 months in, things were really starting to click. And kudos to the team. It was a really great team, and they helped get me up to speed very quickly, and still to this day give me a ton of support. But we're really well positioned. So we've hit our growth stride. We've got our product market fit. We are really lining up some great deals here and got some more announcements that will be coming out in the coming weeks of just the continued growth and the outcomes that we're really delivering it's amazing. And so that's, to see it come to fruition in thinking back like over a year ago to when I was like, oh, this was still an idea. It's been amazing. So really appreciate it.
I love it. Well, this podcast isn't going to go live for several weeks. So any news you want to share now that won't get posted until after it's official?
Well, let's just say this. We're taking over the state of Florida is one of our next opportunities. So we've got some really great partners and clients. City of Hope, we've got out in Southern California, we've got Memorial Hermann and the centers across Texas. We've got Michiana and Northern Indiana and others. Colorado University was one of our first clients and pilots right out of the gate. So we've got clients.
Is that why you moved to Boulder for that account specifically?
No, but I'm hoping it'll help me continue to grow it.
Okay.
I do like the opportunity there, and so we've had some really great opportunities growing into the Florida market, and so we got some really big names that are going to be signing soon. We were one of the early organizations. So Cancer X is the big moonshot program put on by the White House and a couple of key organizations, and so we were selected for their inaugural startup accelerator. So over 100.
Congrats.
Like 110 different, cancer startups, cancer growth stage companies applied for it. We were one of the finalists, and then we're accepted into the cohort. So, to see that, further validation of the work we're doing, at an organization that is so plugged into this space has been amazing. So Yeah, we've got a ton of momentum. That was actually the highlight of the last board meeting was momentum.
Good.
And all the stuff that I told them all a year ago when I first joined is now starting to happen, which is exciting.
It's a very good thing. Very happy to hear it. Cancer care is incredibly nuanced, fragmented, specialized, complicated. How does Reimagine bring quality care into the comforts of home when treating cancer patients?
Yeah, so we partner with health systems, community practices to really extend the great care. We oncologists and the support teams are amazing when patients are there in front of them. What happens is that 90% of a patient's like life of their cancer journey that happens outside of the clinic, we become an extension of that great care to support them there, to support them where patients want to be met. If anything, we learned, the healthcare system learned during the pandemic that patients are willing and want to adopt telehealth for some parts of their care. And I think that's really important, is understanding like we're not here to try and say like all cancer care should happen in the home. What we're saying is there is a place and a time for a lot of this care, and we can support them in the home, in the comfort of their home, so that 2 a.m, they're having a reaction from their latest chemotherapy treatment the day before. Instead of calling the clinic, getting routed maybe to an on-call oncologist, or maybe not, and then having to go to an ER because they're not able to get responses or answers from oncology trained specialists. That's what we're there for, right? And that's what we're really building. So we have this tech enabled services. We have an AI based virtual assistant combined with our oncology trained nurses and APPs that are on staff 24/7. It's that combination that really allows that support to meet patients where and when they need it. That's important. So that's where, kind of the core of what we're building out. There's a whole suite of services and cancer treatment services, everything from proactive symptom management to medication management and others, supporting the SDOH efforts. There's a whole bunch of this that kind of ties in together. But meeting those patients where they're at, so they don't have to go to an ER, don't have to go back to the clinic unannounced. It's a win for all stakeholders in the healthcare space.
I love it. And like, who needs more comfort than someone going through cancer? And if they can do more in the comfort of their own home, they're just going to have a better quality life more than anything. And the more you can make their life uncomplicated, the better. So walk us through, one or several patient stories of them going through the Reimagine Care process, and walk us through like the powerful impact.
Yeah. So, and this happens thousands of times a month. We have one example that really kind of shines a light on the whole program overall. So patients, when they're going through their treatment, so the initial treatment, they're working with their care team in the clinic, let's say at City of Hope. And part of that, they're informed like, oh, hey, as part of going through treatment, you have access to this program. And so we white label in most cases. So we don't, we try not to introduce any more hurdles for patients than needed. So they just think of us as an extension of, City of Hope or Michiana or Memorial Hermann. So they're introduced, they go through the onboarding, and then a couple times a week, we're kind of checking in with them. Hey, do you have any symptoms? If so, like helping to support them. But we have one example where, so the patient knew that, had been in the program for a couple of weeks, had just had their latest round of chemotherapy. And then it was like late on a Friday. Unfortunately, she was having all sorts of reactions, uncontrolled vomiting and diarrhea and others. And, this is a common symptom reaction to chemotherapy. And so it's late on a Friday, and so she's responding on Remi, and it realizes, because we're building these real-time acuity models as patients are interacting with our virtual assistant. And we very quickly realized that these symptoms are escalating, and this patient is definitely headed in the wrong direction. So we escalated up to one of our nurses. She took over the conversation in real time. Hi, this is Brittany from the care team. So we start, having some conversations. I see you've got these are your symptoms. We very quickly realized that, this patient is going to need probably some changes in their medication. So we escalated to one of our APPs, at Reimagine Care. They take over the conversation, have a phone call with the patient, learn a little bit more, and then work with the oncologist to change the medication, have the new prescription set up and sent to the local pharmacy. All of this happens while the patient's at home, right? Mind you. And this is late on a Friday. So now we're like well into Friday evening. Our team is still working, connecting, checking with her multiple times. And then she's able to get the new medication the next morning. We check in with her a couple of times, Saturday and Sunday. Her symptoms start to lessen. She starts to get a much better place. She's very thankful, obviously, for that. And so that highlights, because like 10 out of 10 times that happens without Reimagine Care in the mix. And that patient's going to the urgent care, probably going to the ER, and possibly going to get admitted for an inpatient stay over the weekend. And so that just kind of highlights where we were able to get the patient some like real-time information from a person,
Hmm.
at the moment they needed. So they didn't have to worry, didn't have to, get concerned and then, pull the ripcord and end up going to the ER. So that's one example. Those happen thousands of times every month. And it's
That
really
adds up
amazing.
for
Yeah.
the payers. It adds up for the health systems.
Yeah. And so that's the interesting thing. So we're in this fun little spot where we can support health systems or community practices that are more of a fee for service world,
Hmm.
but we've got a really great story and we're supporting these value-based arrangements as well. So as
Yeah.
the entire system is moving towards value-based care, I mean, cancer care has always been a little bit lagging just because of the variability that happens with it.
Hmm.
And that's kind of expected, but it is going in that direction. And so we are really well positioned in the fact that we're supporting all the stakeholders, from obviously the patient. It's a much better
Hmm.
provider experience, right? So we didn't have to have an oncologist taking a call at like 9 o'clock at night on Friday for that patient. It's better for the health plan because they didn't have to have an extra ER visit on the books. And so costs are lower. You see the benefit of this
And the
program.
peace of mind for the patient is the most important. Like that is extremely stressful, not good for their clinical outlook if like they're constantly under stress and like all these things compound.
Yeah, exactly. And also we talk about this thing, financial toxicity is well known. Everyone talks about it. There's a time toxicity component of cancer care, and it hits on a couple of different levels. There's the patient, right? There's their caregiver, right? Because you haven't gone to ER, or if you haven't gone to your chemotherapy appointments, there's someone, family or loved one or friend that's going with you. So there's, time needed from them. There's a time toxicity on the provider side, right?
Hmm.
Of answering all these EHR messages that are coming in from patients. And so there's this whole concept of time toxicity that we're putting a lot of effort into right now, of like defining and starting to measure and track. It's an amazing story, and so I'm excited for the outcomes that are going to be presented here in the next couple of months around that, because that's exactly right. It's yes the patient, and that's what we define a lot of this for, but there's a lot of other people that are impacted by cancer.
Yep, 100%. In terms of financial impact, is it mostly like, hey, we're avoiding ER utilization? Like, what are some of the other financial components that make this like a strong ROI?
Yeah, also increased volume. So from a value-based care thing, like yes, that is exactly the driver. You talked about avoidable ED and ER visits. Going back to the more of the fee for service world, increased volume, right? So
Hmm.
because we're able to support a lot of these patients, and because we're taking that whole triage layer off of our clients, and providers aren't having to do the EMR responses and have to carve out time in their day to do that, or trying to fit in these
Hmm.
unplanned clinic visits. If so, patients might go back to the clinic instead of going to the ER. So because of that, we're enabling our clients to have a bigger pie, more or
Yep.
less, right?
They're
And so
allowed
just
to practice top a license because they're not having to do things
yep,
someone less specialized or educated can also
yep.
accomplish.
100%. And so we had a great story. So one of our early clients started as a pilot, and one of the oncologists was on the platform for a year. And what we did was we basically studied that provider was able to see a 9% increase in their new patient volume compared to their peer group during that same time, and
Yep.
compared to that oncologist's historical patient volume. So again, it just shows that this solution, these products, like we're able to support more volume. Well, more volume, if you for service world, more revenue. So there's like a big part of this whole value that kind of feeds into our clients, into the health systems. So
You've worked with some amazing leaders and really talented people. Like, what would you say are the handful of traits all successful founders have, regardless of their differences? Like, I'll be the first to say, like, Glenn and Sach are very different people, different strengths, but I would argue both are great leaders. Like, they have similarities, but they also like have very different styles and personalities. So, what have you noticed about all great people? Like, what do they have in common?
yeah, it's a very good question, and it could be a bit loaded. But
Hmm.
overall, I think to be a really successful founder, you have to have just a drive. You have to have like this insane passion for what you're doing. And I say this to a lot of people that are, oh, I want to join a startup. It's like, okay, great. Well, pick one that you're passionate about, because it's not for the faint of heart. It's a lot of work.
Hmm.
And it's even more so if you're a founder, if you're starting this, if you're like the one out there, like you have to be carrying that flag every single day.
You got to be resilient. Like, you're going to get a lot of no's.
Absolutely. And you're going to get no's from investors, you're going to get no from clients, you're going to get no's from candidates, like people you want to get to join you in this journey. And so you have to be resilient, but you have to have just a ton of this like maniacal passion to really go make this a reality, almost to the point where like, you're not willing to accept it. Or if you get a no, you're like, okay, fine. Well, there's 8 more. We're going to go do it. So I think that's one. I think also what sets apart the really successful ones from the ones that maybe aren't quite as successful is I think a really, really great founder actually understands their people, cares about them. And some people show that in different ways, and that's okay. But if deep down you actually have someone...
Glenn shows it by calling them at 3 a.m., just letting them know he's thinking about them.
I mean, I've had the 6 a.m. like morning, like let's go for a walk meeting. So we've had those, but you have to care about people, and you also have to know, like, how far can we push? Because there's the founders that just push until no end and they just like burn people up. But there's founders that understand each of their direct reports and their key people in the business, and they know how far they can push them, but they actually care about them. So they're not going to push them off the ledge. And I think that's like a little bit of kind of an unsung trait. And some people do it without even knowing it. I think that's so crucial for a lot of leaders, but especially the founders. Because again, like I said, you're the one carrying the flag. You want people to like follow you all the way. You have to be willing to actually care for them at some level. So
I'd consider you a startup junkie at this point. You're just a glutton for punishment.
Yeah.
What do all early hires have to have in common that make them successful in a startup, compared to any other later stage business?
Yeah.
What are the must-haves?
The must-haves. I think to some extent you have to have the passion, right? You have to actually care for what you're doing. And that's why I always try and say, like, if you're going to get into the startup space, pick something you actually care about.
Yeah.
So I think you have to have that. You have to have the resilience too, because, as team members, we hear no. Our first client, first investors, like all this stuff, like you hear no a lot. And so you have to have that. You have to have the get shit done gene, right? Like we're going to crack some
urgency.
Stuff out. We're going to do it. Yeah. We're going to have the urgency. We're going to do it. Like we're going to like really push this across the finish line. But I think you also have to have flexibility and adaptability, right? Because early days, you wear a lot of hats. And so that kind of goes back to my point. I was like, some days you show up and we're tackling one thing. The next day is something completely different. You're like, all right, so here we go. So if you're someone that really loves to have a very narrow swim lane with a very structured role that's been done by thousands of people before, you're not going to like a startup.
Yeah.
So the flexibility and adaptability, I think, is also extremely important in understanding someone that's going to be successful in a startup and these types of roles versus someone that might be a really great hire once we get this rocket ship off the ground and we're headed to Mars or wherever we're going, that might be the great hire then.
So I think problem solving and being, glass half full and being an optimist can be really, really important in the early stages of a business.
Optimism to an extent, as long as it's not delusional optimism. Like I'm an optimist, like family will tell you this. I have glass half full, like, always trying to find the silver lining, everything else. But you have to have a fine line because if the optimism goes too far and you're just like kind of whistling past the graveyard, people see right through that. And so I agree with you 100%, Norm, but I think there's like a little bit of the caveat there that we have to be careful with.
What do we have to look forward to, coming from Reimagine Care in the next 5 years? What are your bold predictions of what your company's going to do and, what your company is going to do for cancer patients as a whole?
Yeah, I'm really, really excited for the opportunity we have. I think we are extremely well positioned. And I think the next 5 years, the whole space is going to be completely changed. I mentioned the move towards value-based care, but also just a better patient experience overall. And we know we have this huge supply and demand issue that's only growing, right? We have all these great medications that are coming out. The treatments are better. Patients are living longer. More patients are being diagnosed now than ever, right? Especially even at younger ages. So we have this huge demand side of this equation that's growing. The supply side is shrinking, unfortunately. People are burnt out. Oncologists are burnt out. Nurses are burnt out. 800,000 oncology nurses are expected to leave the industry in the next couple of years. Yeah. And so we have this growing divide in the supply and demand. So we have to have a better way of supporting patients and supporting the existing clinical teams. And so what I see the next 5 years, Reimagine Care is leading that change, that evolution, right? The evolution out of the clinic-based model into a model where the clinic is obviously a very important part of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much more. And that's where we're actually on that journey right now. We're going to fast forward 5 years. We are wildly successful. We have a very large network of amazing partners across the industry. We've unlocked with the payers, like how do we set the right arrangements, so the right risk-based arrangements, so that everyone has an opportunity. If you're doing your job, everyone has the opportunity to make a fair amount of money in the space. And I think that's that combination of bringing all of these parties together. That's what we're leading. And that's going to be really exciting in 5 years.
Well, all of us have been touched by cancer in one way or the other. And outside of your direct competitors, I'm sure everyone's going to be rooting you on to accomplish all those things. I certainly will be. I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, like, how do you practice what you preach? We live, breathe, sleep digital health and wellness, but we're in stressful jobs. Sometimes it's not easy to find time to work out or eat right or, meditate or whatever it is. So how do you participate in wellness? How do you exercise weekly? How do you reduce stress?
Yeah. I always love this question when you ask it. And I think it's just so important for all of us. So I appreciate that you continue to ask, like all of your guests this. So I've always been someone that kind of works out. I'm a morning workout person. If I don't do it before work, I'm not going to do it. It's just the way it's. So I usually get up, 6 days a week, and I'm working out in the morning before the family's up and doing anything else. So I try and get it out of the way. But I got into triathlons actually a couple of years ago. And so I like the variability in that. Like before, there were years where I would just run, right? Or there were years where I would just lift or whatever else. I feel like I kind of got in ruts with that. But I love the concept of triathlons because, a couple of days a week I'll swim, a couple of days a week I will ride the bike. Did a 20-mile ride this morning before the sun came up, which is great. Couple days a week we'll run, even though I hate the running component of it. But so really just working out, and I'll actually, kind of add to that, especially for those of us that travel a fair amount, end up being on the road. I've found, doesn't matter what time zone I'm in, if I get up and first thing I work out, it just sets your clock, right?
Yep.
So even if you're going West Coast to East Coast, vice versa, it was something I actually learned to really appreciate when I was going back and forth to Carrum from Chicago to San Francisco. You wake up every morning and work out, your body gets just right on the right schedule. So I found that's a great way to kind of balance that out and, to be healthy too.
Awesome. And I think obviously something that's so important to health is what we put in our bodies. I think, a lot of people are challenged with not necessarily having great eating habits and knowing what's healthy. And there's a lot of health foods that are marketed that way that actually are horrible for you. So any homemade meals that you or Ami, your wife, make that, keeps you guys healthy and might inspire someone else to try something new?
Yeah, well, I am very lucky. You mentioned Ami, so she definitely keeps us on a great meal plan, and truly blessed that she's able to help take care of us in that regard. But some of the ones that we really enjoy, actually, we cut out a lot of red meat lately. Sometimes I'll eat it when I go out, but we cut out a lot of red meat. So it's a lot of fish is kind of a basic. So we'll take salmon, put it in the air fryer, so marinate it in a little bit of like a soy sauce marinade. Put it in the air fryer, crisps it up a little bit. But one of the ones that really love, so sweet potatoes. So she'll take sweet potato, bake in the oven for a while, and then kind of cut it open, and we put this whole black bean, onions, a whole bunch of things kind of that have been cooked up in a pan here, and put it on there and layer it all up. It ends up a ton of protein, ton of fiber, and super healthy for you without having any red meat in it. So
an overstuffed baked sweet potato. I love it. I'm gonna try that myself this week. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining us on the Digital Health Heavyweights podcast. It was great, to spend more time with you, and we're really excited for, what you continue to accomplish at Reimagine Care. And thank you so much for talking us through your journey from Allscripts to Livongo to Carrum and now to Reimagine. Incredible what you've accomplished, and we're just so excited to see what you continue to do.
Thank you for having me, Norm. I always appreciate our conversations, but this podcast has been awesome. So keep it going.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. Please like, comment, and subscribe below if you enjoyed it.